Thank you, everyone, for coming and for being here for this really important conversation about housing in general across our state. But first, I'd like to acknowledge some people who are here with us today. We have Maureen Lashley, the Executive Director of Habitat for Humanity of Dutchess County. We've got Tolga Morawski, Executive Director for Greater Mohawk Valley Land Bank, and Richard Russo, Chairman of the Capital Region Land Bank and Schenectady County Legislator. Thank you all for being here with us today in support. It is no shock to anyone to hear that we are facing a significant housing crisis. And just like an ice storm or a wildfire, it requires an urgent response. We need housing, and we need all kinds of it. But we especially need workforce and affordable housing. We need to rehab it, we need to build it, and we need to make sure that we are keeping people in their homes. However, upstate and rural communities are consistently left out of the conversation, and we need to be talking about broader housing solutions. This is not a one-size-fits-all problem, and we need to be intentional about how we are including upstate communities in the housing fight. Because when we talk about the lack of affordability and availability of homes in New York, we can't just talk about that in the context of urban areas. We need to talk about it in the entirety of New York State, regardless of if it's a bustling city center or a nice rural downtown. And upstate New York is quite literally on the front lines of this housing crisis. Before the pandemic, a world-renowned destination hotel in Ulster County had over 300 job openings because their workers, people who would work in that incredible institution, could not find housing that was affordable to them. And during the pandemic, we know that Kingston and Hudson were the two most moved to places in the country. Think about that. Two upstate cities were the most moved to places during this pandemic in the country. And that's a reality, that's a challenging reality for the people who live in our communities, our local full-time residents. This has been catastrophic. Our businesses can't expand because they can't find employees to live anywhere. They can't expand, they can't find people to do the jobs to make our communities run. Our fragile housing supply has been dramatically pushed to the brink by the pandemic. It's been pushed to the brink by people finally discovering how great upstate New York is, gentrifying it, and displacing the people who make our communities so special. Our communities lack the supply to accommodate everyone, and we don't have the mechanisms in place to keep homes affordable. We're seeing houses sell for upwards of $300,000 over the asking price. Many of these are or will become second homes. And while people who actually live in our communities, even people who are making good salaries, can't afford to find homes in the communities where they were raised. This housing crisis is an issue of upstate equity. It's an issue of prolonged underinvestment. And it's an issue that we are calling on the legislature to fund in a big way this budget season. We've put together a $200 million proposal to increase the supply of local housing for purchase and for rent in upstate New York, the scale of which has never been done in the state budget before. We are seeking funding for 7 key housing programs. To help with home ownership, we are championing the Affordable Housing Corporation, the Rural Preservation Program, the Community Land Trust Revolving Acquisition Fund, and the Restore Access to Home Program. These are all programs that make homeownership more affordable for upstate New Yorkers. They implement accessibility and safety repairs on existing homes so that seniors and people with disabilities can remain living in their homes. And they turn zombie properties into new homes that will remain affordable for the long term. To help with rent unit supply, we are advocating for the Small Rental Development Initiative and the Rural Rental Assistance Program, which will build and preserve affordable small-scale rental units, which are typically left out of state and federal subsidies. And for upstate communities, it's those scales that are the ones that are really needed in our communities. And to help to create housing in walkable downtown areas, we are supporting the New York Main Street program, which will help preserve residential elements of mixed-use neighborhoods, revitalize our downtowns, and attract new businesses into our areas to make sure that we have thriving communities across upstate. Funding these programs at the level that we're proposing would have a transformational impact on the availability of housing in rural and upstate communities and would immediately address much of the housing crisis across the state. These programs directly support nonprofits and local governments that are doing the work to repair, rehabilitate, and build new housing. And we have many of these people who are here today to discuss how important this funding would be in our work to start to solve the housing crisis. And before I introduce our first speaker, I want to say thank you to Senator John Liu, who has joined us in support of this presentation. You are right on time. Thank you for being here and for all of your support and your advocacy with us. We appreciate it because this is a full state issue, and we appreciate that. Our first speaker, I would like to introduce my other wonderful colleague, Senator Rachel May, who is chair of the Legislative Commission on Rural Resources.
Yes, thank you, Senator Hinchey, and thank you for your leadership on this really important area of concern. We had a roundtable just last week with a number of the people who are here with us today and learned so much about the scale of the problem, the intertwining issues of housing that has been abandoned, but it isn't really available for, it isn't rehabilitatable, it isn't, and so, there are just so many different levels of the problem. I do want to talk about a few things. I'm very supportive of this whole package that Senator Hinchey laid out. And I'll also add that I'm working on a statewide right to counsel, because people who are evicted, if you're facing eviction, you're typically facing a lot of other crises in your life. And to have to navigate a complex legal battle over your home is often just not in the bandwidth of people who are facing eviction. And so making sure that there is, that lawyers are available is really important. But in rural areas, lawyers are scarce. So the problem is compounded in rural areas. I also have been supportive of a fair housing testing program that would be located in the Attorney General's office and make sure that access to housing is being provided in a fair manner, because the civil right to housing, I think, is really important. And if as soon as we look at the homelessness issue, look at the housing insecurity issue in rural areas, we see that it has repercussions on the schools and on businesses and on the whole regional economy. And so this is something we really need to be focusing on. So I'm very grateful to Senator Hinchey, as I said, and to all of these real champions for rural residents and for rural housing and for making sure that we are addressing this problem that has been invisible for far too long. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator May, and thank you also for calling attention to some of the work that you're doing in this space. They're all really important, especially the right to counsel. Very supportive, and these are all just parts of the conversation of the things that we are working on. Next, I'd like to welcome Michael Borges, the Executive Director of the Rural Housing Coalition of New York, to discuss the impact of Small Rental Development Initiative, Rural Preservation Program, and the Rural Rental Assistance.
Thank you, Senator. Good afternoon, everyone. I first want to applaud the efforts of Senator Hinchey in bringing attention to the housing needs of rural New York, as well as her colleagues like Senator May here, who have joined with her in supporting increased funding in the state budget. I also want to thank Assemblymember Kerry Warner, who has led similar efforts in her chamber. I was recently asked by a reporter whether there was a housing crisis, and my answer was emphatically yes, driven in part by both regional and national factors, ranging from weather disasters that impacted the supply of housing in Schoharie and surrounding counties, to New York City residents migrating to the Hudson Valley and outbidding local residents for housing, to wealthy investors buying second homes in the North Country, not to mention the shortage of building materials and contractors due to the pandemic. Rural New York is facing the proverbial perfect storm of a housing crisis and needs a comprehensive effort to address this crisis and reverse the decades-long decline of rural housing stock and population. The legislature can start the process of revitalizing rural New York in this year's budget by investing in both the organizations and the programs that can and are serving the housing needs of rural communities. We are asking for an $840,000 increase and that's correct, $840,000, which is a rounding error in the state budget, in the Rural Preservation Program to fund the activities of the rural preservation companies, of which there are 58 currently serving rural communities around the state. We're asking for $20 million for the Small Rental Development Initiative to fund affordable rental housing units of 20 units or less, and $1.8 million in additional rental subsidies for these small rental projects. Let today mark the beginning of the end of rural New York's decline. Thank you very much, and I appreciate your support.
Thank you, Michael, very much. It's now my pleasure to welcome Christine Brady Laval, the CEO and Executive Director of Ulster County Habitat for Humanity.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Senator Hinchey. I'd like to thank both Senator Hinchey and Assemblywoman Warner for inviting me here today and for highlighting Upstate in the incredibly important conversation regarding affordable housing. I'm so pleased to be gathered here today with my colleagues who are also promoting better, more just, and equitable housing policy and funding each day. We're so very fortunate to have Senator Hinchey as a champion in this effort. The Senator's proposal addresses many vital funding sources for organizations working to create affordable rental and homeownership opportunities for nonprofits like Habitat. With each passing year, the gap in affordability grows as home prices continually rise and wages do not keep pace. At no time have more working families found themselves left out of the dream of homeownership and the stability that it brings to both family and community. In Ulster County, well over half of our renters are paying more than 30% of their income towards housing, and almost a third of that half is paying over 50%. It is now more crucial than ever to secure funding to help affordable housing agencies not just continue, but to expand their work. I'm so grateful that the Senator's proposal includes an increase in the budget for the Affordable Housing Corporation, which is a vital source of funding for Ulster Habitat and Habitat affiliates statewide. This critical funding has helped our affiliate grow to multiple builds per year and allowed us to serve more families. The most recent family served by our program with AHC support is a family of 5, whose youngest child, Olivia, was born with significant health issues that will likely keep her in a wheelchair for life. Her parents found themselves unable to afford rent in their hometown where they had both been born and grew up. They found themselves living with family as their only option. When Olivia's family came to Ulster Habitat, she, both of her siblings, and both parents were living with her grandparents in a 2-story house. Olivia was unable to use her wheelchair as there were stairs that were a danger to her. We built a wheelchair-accessible 1-story home with wider doorways, a roll-in shower, and a patio for her to play on so that she can go outside with her siblings. Funding from AHC helped to make that home possible. It is imperative that this incredibly challenging housing market to not only protect AHC funding, but to increase it as Senator Hinchey's proposal does. As we've all navigated the challenges of COVID for the past 2 years, we have all learned how truly indispensable our essential workers are. Affordable housing is out of reach for most people in those vital jobs. AHC helps us at Habitat to partner with those families and give them a chance at the dream of homeownership, to realize the strength and stability that a home provides and allows them to stay in their communities, our communities, in a market of ever-increasing prices. Habitat's work with the Affordable Housing Corporation has built our capacity statewide. To date, more than 700 homes have been built with the help of AHC and Habitat working together. We look forward to continuing and growing that partnership and capacity for many, many years to come. Ulster Habitat and the entire statewide Habitat network enthusiastically lend our voice and support to increase funding for AHC and to Senator Hinchey's proposal. Thank you.
I also want to take a moment now to acknowledge and thank another one of our colleagues, Senator Brian Kavanaugh, who's chair of the Housing Committee, who was going to join us today, but he has a conflict, so he was unable to be here. But he has also been incredibly supportive and outspoken about this proposal too, and we appreciate and thank him for that. Next, I would like to invite Adam Zarenko, the Executive Director of the Albany County Land Bank. I don't know where anybody is behind me, sorry.
I'm lurking back there. Thank you, Senator Hinchey, and thank you to your colleagues in the Senate, including Senator May, Senator Liu, and Senator Kavanaugh, and all the other leaders for your work around increasing resources for affordable housing. So I'm Adam Zarenko. I'm the Executive Director of the Albany County Land Bank. We're standing in one of the neighborhoods that we serve here in Albany. And I'm also the President of the State Land Bank Association. And land banks are essentially nonprofit organizations that have special powers under New York state law necessary to reclaim vacant and abandoned and tax foreclosed properties. New York State created our state's land bank program shortly after the 2008 foreclosure crisis to help equip communities with the tools they need to combat the tremendous number of vacant and abandoned properties that damage our cities, towns, and villages, especially in our rural communities. It's not just limited to cities. Since established, New York State has developed one of the most active and effective networks of land banks in the United States. Right now, there's 26 land banks in the state, and we serve over 70% of the state's population outside the city of New York. I'm joined here with 4 representatives from 4 different land banks alone that serve in and around the capital region, including the Greater Mohawk Valley Land Bank, the Kingston City Land Bank, and the Capital Region Land Bank. To date, our land banks have rehabbed over 460 vacant buildings, demolished over 1,200 blighted structures, returned over 2,500 vacant, abandoned, and tax foreclosed properties back to productive use, generating $100 million of assessed value and over $250 million in private investment. One of the ways we've been able to accomplish this is by partnering with different organizations, including all the organizations here and many that aren't. Groups like Habitat for Humanity, different community land trusts, and affordable housing developers are all our partners through combining our site control that land banks get through vacant and abandoned properties and the resources that the senator is advocating for today. Without these investments in these resources and these accessible programs, without investments in New York State land banks, and without our partners, we wouldn't be able to do all that great work. The Community Land Trust Acquisition Fund is very important for our state's community land trust to break down these barriers. Land banks and land trusts can work together. In fact, here in Albany, we have one of the first land bank land trust partnerships in the nation, which we help get properties to our land trust in order for them to rehab them into permanent affordable homes in the city of Albany, with a special focus on stronger neighborhoods so lower income families can live in neighborhoods that they wouldn't be able to access before. That all comes down to the resources that programs like these that provide, as well as working with land banks and vacant properties. And that's the type of model that's being replicated across the country and can be replicated across the state. And New York's leading in that right now. We just need to support it through the investments necessary. One of the things that we have here is all the pieces of progressive community development programs in place, all the best practices across the nation. All of these organizations exist right now in the state of New York. But these investments are necessary. And combining these investments and these programs and making them accessible to more organizations and partnering with the state's land banks, we can kind of do 2 things. We can tackle 2 problems. I don't think there's a community in New York State that's not struggling with vacant and abandoned properties and or housing affordability. And by combining all these things together and working together, we can tackle 2 things at once. We can transform vacant and abandoned properties into affordable housing. And that's why we're so excited about these proposed investments. And we're standing by, looking forward to working with all of our partners here. And I want to thank all the senators for their leadership, especially Senator Hinchey. So thank you very much for having me today.
Thank you very much. Next, I would like to introduce Blair Sebastian, the Director of New York State Rural Advocates, to talk about the Rural Preservation Program.
Thank you, Senator. Good morning, everyone. Back in the dark ages, before there was a low-income housing tax credit and before private developers found it profitable to work in upstate and rural communities, the development work in affordable housing development work in upstate New York was driven by community-based not-for-profits, by rural preservation companies. Prior to 1990, my RPC colleagues and I produced hundreds, literally hundreds of buildings, thousands of units using the federal Section 515 program, the New York State Housing Trust Fund program, New York State's Homeless and Housing Assistance Program, the Rural Area Revitalization Program, which is no longer funded, but was a great tool for community-based development. In 1986, Congress passed tax reform that included the low-income housing tax credit with the intent of bringing private developers into the affordable housing development game, and it worked like a charm, with a vengeance. We now have private developers from other states working in upstate New York, looking to develop projects, most of which are beneficial to the communities they serve. So in this changing world, the Rural Preservation Company program, rural preservation companies controlled and directed by local folks, made a pivot to support more local, more immediate issues, including the preservation of home ownership stock. You know, rural New York is primarily a place of homeowners. We are 65, 70, 75, 80% owner-occupied housing. And as you know, upstate New York has lost housing units at a pretty incredible rate during the last decade. So our mission now is in part to protect that existing housing stock, to protect that home ownership stock and to stop any further deterioration in that stock. That's where some of the priorities of our groups have moved. Other activities under the Rural Preservation Program that Mike Borges spoke about are responsible for delivering the list of state programs that Senator Hinchey is working on, whether it's Main Street or the Affordable Housing Corporation program, Hope Restore, which provides emergency home repairs to low-income elderly folks, to Access to Home, which provides accessibility modifications for people with disabilities. All of those programs are the core of what RPCs are delivering these days. So in support of Mike Borges's plea and the plea of others, we're looking to see the RPC program funded at $6.2 million next year. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Blair. I'd now like to introduce Larry Kajewski. I'm sorry if I pronounced that wrong. Executive Director of the Catskill Mountain Housing Authority.
Thank you, Senator Hinchey. Catskill Mountain Housing has administered 3 New York Main Street program grants in the village of Catskill and in the Reed Street Historic District of Coxsackie. These grants have bolstered local efforts to maintain historic values, to support existing businesses, and to attract new businesses into these districts. The grants can also provide for affordable residential housing within those districts. We've given grants to small businesses looking to maintain and improve their buildings, to new businesses coming into these districts, and to some large-scale developers who are leveraging New York Main Street grants to bring major projects into these communities. We've seen firsthand the investment made by and with the New York Main Street program in these communities. New York towns and villages need this program to spur investment and vitality into their communities. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Larry. I would now like to welcome Kevin O'Connor, the Chief Executive Officer of REPCO.
I can't tell you how pleased I am to stand here today with my senator, Senator Hinchey, advocating so strongly for affordable housing resources here in New York. And I want to thank her colleagues from the Senate who have joined us today, and all of the other housing colleagues that are here today who are working tirelessly to try to address the housing crisis that we are under today. I'm here to talk about 2 programs, the Rural Preservation Program and the Affordable Housing Corporation. My organization, REPCO, last year celebrated our 40th anniversary as a rural preservation company headquartered in Ulster County. But in 2015, we affiliated with another small RPC in Orange County, the Rural Development Advisory Council, RDAC. And just a little bit of what RDAC has done in their near 40 years. Back in the day when President Obama provided some stimulus, RDAC stepped forward to provide additional weatherization when the Community Action Agency in Orange County couldn't do it. Following the foreclosure debacle 10 years ago, RDAC, the small RPC, has been the leader in the Hudson Valley, partnering with Legal Services of the Hudson Valley, REPCO, Hudson River Housing, and other nonprofits to provide foreclosure prevention counseling for well over 10 years, and today remains the lead agency in foreclosure prevention counseling in the Hudson Valley. They work with private developers to develop over 1,000 units. They've done home ownership, housing rehab. Recently, they've delivered over $300,000 in access to home for veterans to make critical repairs and accessibility modifications so veterans could continue to live in their home. And currently, they're delivering $1.9 million from the Enterprise Foundation to landlords, small landlords under 9 units, to help them to fix their units for the pledge of remaining in the affordable housing game. All that coming out of a small RPC in Orange County. One of the programs that we all use and love is the Affordable Housing Corporation, and that money for home ownership. You know, the housing continuum is very broad. We're all on it, and home ownership plays a critical role, particularly in our suburban and rural areas where sometimes the home ownership rate is 70, even 90%. In the Hudson Valley, the others have talked about it, the crisis is unbelievable. The city of Kingston had the highest percentage increase in home price sales in the fall of 2020. The county and the city have had upwards of nearly 50% increase in the cost of home ownership. The Affordable Housing Corporation funds are flexible. They allow for down payment, closing costs, and they require the 51% on a rehab go towards the rehab of our oldest housing stock in the nation. Today, to achieve a home ownership, we have to be very creative. We have to combine state funds with other grants, federal dollars. We're leveraging the USDA 1% mortgage product to help people to get in. We're looking at 2 to 4 families so that first-time homeowners might benefit from some rental income. We're looking at land trusts and several other creative ways to affect home ownership. The Affordable Housing Corporation needs additional dollars so that we can do home ownership in all our towns. When we can do home ownership, we are creating housing stability for families. We are creating community stability for the communities where we work, and we're creating economic development through affordable workforce housing. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Kevin. I would also like to thank and acknowledge another colleague of ours who's been mentioned here a number of times, Assemblymember Carrie Warner, who may still make it, but I know she had a meeting as well. But want to thank her for all of her incredible efforts in always supporting upstate New York and rural communities, especially in the housing space. And now for our final speaker, I would like to introduce Mike Gilliard, Executive Director of the Kingston City Land Bank.
You guys said all the good stuff. I'm the last one. Good afternoon. My name is Mike Gilliard. I serve as the Executive Director of the Kingston City Land Bank, nonprofit public authority. It's my pleasure and privilege to speak in support of the Senator's tremendous leadership on this critical issue. The KCLB is also proud to represent, in our own small way, the amazing coalition of land banks throughout the state who comprise the New York Land Bank Association. Also, I'd like to thank the Vice Chair of our board, Mr. Bob Dennison, for attending and for his tireless stewardship of our work. Affordable homeownership is both the pinnacle and cornerstone of the housing spectrum for communities throughout our state. It represents the glue of our neighborhoods. The enduring, stabilizing benefit for families who are offered the opportunity to become homeowners is in large part created by the day-to-day efforts of many, if not all, of the organizations who have spoken before me. We are proud to fight the good fight alongside so many tireless and dedicated people. For decades, this work has only been made possible by support through the Affordable Housing Corporation. AHC funds are the critical component to allow our work to proceed. At this critical and somehow uncertain juncture for all of us, it could not be more important to increase funding for what is the primary catalyst used to produce the bedrock of our communities. On behalf of all of us at the Kingston City Land Bank, we celebrate the Senator's thoughtful and forward-looking initiative to benefit many current and future generations of New Yorkers in their pursuit of owning an affordable home. Thank you.
I want to thank all of our speakers, my colleagues, the attendees today for being here and for being part of our coalition to make the biggest state investment in upstate and rural housing that we have ever seen. So we are calling to make sure that we are able to do this in this budget. We are really excited. I thank everybody here for your work supporting homeowners and tenants alike in our communities. We need you desperately. Thank you for what you do. And we're really excited to now go back into conference and make sure we are fighting for the $200 million in our rural housing initiatives. Thank you all very much.